The Detroit Pistons have signed Duncan Robinson and Caris Levert. Malik Beasley is under investigation by the FBI for gambling on NBA games and NBA player props. And the Pistons are still working on a sign-in trade with the Sacramento Kings for Dennis Schroder. All of that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Let's get it.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing. Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. It's Aaron Johnson, and joining me is Jasper Apollonia for today's show. We've got a lot to talk about. Although it was a little bit of a slow start to free agency for Detroit, it certainly picked up in the last few days. So we're going to talk about those signings, particularly Caris Levert and Duncan Robinson. We'll also talk about some of the departures for Detroit in Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dennis Schroder, who both have landed elsewhere. But before we do that, we have to lead off with what happened to Detroit prior to the start of free agency. It was Shams Charania on Sunday, right? Was it Sunday? It was a day before free agency. Yeah, Sunday the 29th. He came out with a report stating that Malik Beasley had fallen under investigation by the United States government for potential gambling on NBA-related games and player prop bets. This news gets announced on the verge of him, according again to Shams, being on the verge of signing a 3-year, $42 million contract extension with the Detroit Pistons. It certainly put a wrench in everything that Detroit likely had planned for free agency, obviously starting with the deal for Malik Beasley himself. But Jasper, I'll turn it over to you here. I mean, this is first and foremost just an incredibly unfortunate situation for both Malik Beasley and the Detroit Pistons to find themselves in.
Yeah, Aaron, it's crazy that we're starting off our free agency show. We're not talking about free agency. We're talking about something that happened even before. You said it was a slow start. I don't know if any team had a hotter start to free agency than the Detroit Pistons when they found out the number one guy that I think everybody, regardless of how you felt about any other player on the roster, I think everybody was in total agreement. Malik Beasley had to come back. And now it's looking like not only is he not going to be coming back to the Pistons, he might not be coming back to the NBA anytime soon. A good chance he might not be in free society for much longer either. Some pretty crazy things being alleged here. Mm-hmm. I mean, having his wages garnished by a dentist that he owed like $48,000. Dude, how bad can your teeth be? Like seriously, bro. Like mind-boggling stuff. And while you definitely, let's be clear, this is all alleged. There are no formal charges have been brought against Malik Beasley, so we need to be very careful when we're saying this. But some of the things that have come out in the last couple days regarding him owing a lot of money to a lot of people, rumors that the reason he left the Minnesota Timberwolves a few years ago was because they didn't trust him off the court. And it makes a lot of sense now when you see the money that he took with Detroit for last year. It makes sense that he was willing to do that. Unfortunately, something like this is just really bad. It's obviously terrible for the Pistons. It's obviously terrible news for Malik Beasley. It's just bad for the league in general. Like, this is just something you just do not want to see at all. And a lot of the stuff that we're seeing coming out is like, it's just really bad. So I don't think you can break down the Pistons free agency and like whether you like or dislike their signings without first just addressing the fact that this screwed up all their plans. We don't know exactly what they were going to do. It could have been something very similar to this, like Caris Levert Still could have been a Piston, and it might have been Malik Beasley instead of Duncan Robinson. But this, without a doubt, threw a massive wrench into their free agency plans here. And to be honest, from what we're hearing, it doesn't seem like a reunion is going to be happening anytime soon. So just straight off the bat, that is a huge loss for the Pistons. I mean, we said it multiple times on this podcast, man. 5 players in NBA history have ever hit 300 threes in a season. Malik Beasley was one of them last year. So to lose that kind of production, regardless of who you're bringing in, that's a big blow.
Yeah, it's been a downward spiral surrounding Malik Beasley since that initial report from Shams Charania about the FBI opening an investigation against him for the alleged gambling-related activities. You know, there's been stuff about his financial past coming out, his former marketing agency that he was working with that he owed money to, his wages being garnished to pay for his residency in Detroit that he had been living in during his season here. It's just a lot of bad things all coming out at once. And then, yeah, you hear the stories now coming out from the woodworks of, you know, his time in Minnesota and why Minnesota didn't keep him and why they let him walk. And it's just not good. And the fact of the matter is that very much threw Detroit's free agency plan off. You're talking about having a 3-year, $42 million extension lined up with a guy that made 319 three-pointers for you last season, averaged 16 points a game, was one of your top 3 to 4 players all year long. I think that's safe to say. And you're planning on bringing him back. He's your primary target. And then the day before free agency, that news drops. And perhaps the Pistons knew about it a little bit beforehand. We don't know. No other details have come out. The Pistons haven't really made any other comment other than they're, you know, following and cooperating with the league and the FBI with the investigation. So we don't know how much sooner they knew about this stuff before we found out about it. That being said, they had this theoretical deal lined up with him. So that tells me it couldn't have been that, you know, they couldn't have learned about it that much earlier than we found out about it. So you have to imagine that this really, really threw off Detroit's free agency plan. And this is where I think we now jump into where the Pistons are at right now. Free agency started off on Monday with Dennis Schroder being one of the first guys to sign elsewhere. He signs with the Sacramento Kings. There's a whole story that I'm sure going to get into about the Schroder deal with Sacramento potentially turning into a sign and trade that would get Malik Monk to Detroit. Obviously, we know that has not happened, at least not yet, and it doesn't sound like it's going to happen. The Pistons, so they lose Dennis Schroder. They're without Malik Beasley. They open up free agency with their first acquisition being the re-signing of Paul Reed. That's, you know, all well and fine, a third string big. He was, I think, very acceptable for Detroit last year when he was needed. But the big move for Detroit on night one of free agency was the team coming to a deal with Caris Levert for 2 years, $29 million. That is, you know, coming off the heels of the Beasley stuff, coming off the heels of Schroeder signing in Sacramento, and they wind up with Caris Levert coming off a season where he spent time with the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Atlanta Hawks. He's now going to be 31 years old by the time the season starts. Last year had averages of 12 points per game, 3.5 assists, 3 rebounds, and shot 37% from the three-point line. This has been, to me, the most polarizing acquisition for Detroit so far. It's probably the one that I'm least excited about. But, Jasper, I'll let you start here. What are your initial thoughts on the addition of Caris Levert for the Detroit Pistons?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair thing you're bringing up first, which is like, I think regardless of how you feel about the Caris Levert signing, it's definitely not a sexy one. It's not the one that you go, whoa, we got Caris Levert. I mean, in the words of George Niang, he's been traded 7 times. So, this is a guy that, while he has been productive, he is what he is. Caris Levert is what he is at this point in his career. He's over the age of 30. You pretty much have a good expectation of what you're going to get from him. And, that kind of production, like you just look at his, let's say, just last 3 years, you're talking about a guy who's going to give you 13 points, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, a steal, 36% three-point shooting. To me, I'm looking at this as kind of the Dennis Schroder, I don't want to say Tim Hardaway Jr. replacement, but I'm really seeing this as the Dennis Schroder replacement, where, Caris has played a little backup point guard in the past. He is a player who can pass a little bit. He can dribble a little bit. I think if Mike was here on the podcast, he'd say maybe a little too much, which is absolutely something. But let's be honest, Dennis Schroder has the same problem as well. So for me, while this isn't a sexy signing, and while I know people were very excited by the prospect of Malik Beasley, I actually have to say I think this is a better deal for Detroit. And a lot of it comes down to he's a better shooter than Malik Beasley. And Malik Monk. Whoa, I saw you make that face. I'm sorry. I knew I said something wrong the second you made that face. No, so sorry. He's a much better shooter, consistent shooter than Malik Monk. And I think that he's somebody also, when you look at the contract, and this is a big thing for me when we're discussing both this signing and the Duncan Robinson signing, it's the number of years on it. 2 years, $29 million. And I think what this gives you for the Pistons, and it's also going to tie into the Duncan Robinson contract, this gives you a level of flexibility, I think, both within your roster, because Caris can play a little backup point guard. He can play a little bit of shooting guard. He can play a little bit of 3. And, I think that's something that's true for both him and Duncan Robinson. They are more versatile players than both Dennis Schroder, Malik Beasley, and frankly, even Tim Hardaway Jr. I think they are both, while not good defenders, an upgrade defensively over those players as well. And when you look at the contracts, the years, and the terms of those deals, they are very, very movable contracts. So I'm looking at this as like, Detroit obviously got screwed right before free agency by losing out on Malik Beasley. It seems to me as if there was never a plan to go after a big-name free agent. Also, to be clear, big-name free agents don't really hit the free agency market unless they're trying to get paid from, like, the team they're already on. There it says RF, restricted free agency. Trades are really where star players move in this league. Like, and I know people are disappointed to some extent on how this has gone, but you were not going to acquire a star in free agency. And I think we have to be like very clear about that. So what you had to do was replace the production you lost, which remains to be seen. But when you look at it, Duncan Robinson is, for his career, the most prolific three-point shooter in NBA history. Like, nobody attempts more threes per 36 minutes in the history of the league than Duncan Robinson does. And when you look at Caris Levert and him, they are guys who have positional versatility. They can replace some of that production, but they also leave the door open for the young players. And that is, I think, as we see it now, and as the front office is clearly telling us, that is the key to this next season. They very obviously want to have something similar to what they had last year, but with a full season of Jaden Ivey and Asar Thompson playing together. And I think, Aaron, before I turn it back over to you, that's a big reason why you haven't seen any talk about extensions for Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey yet. I think that the way I'm looking at this right now, they're saying, look, we made that step to be where we didn't expect to be, but we wanted to be. Now we have to see how this team comes together and how the young core works as a whole, because let's be honest, they haven't seen it yet.
I'll say for the record, I would have rather had Malik Monk than Caris Levert. I think the shooting is pretty close. I think Caris Levert in his career has had some higher highs, but overall he's just as streaky of a shooter as Malik Monk is. I like Malik Monk more because as I look at the roster right now, I think the Pistons are not set at the backup point guard position. You know, if their plan is to make do with Caris Levert and Marcus Sasser, I think we're going to kind of end up being in a similar situation as we were last trade deadline and being like, hey, this team needs to go find some additional playmaking. They need to go get a second string guard. And I feel like that's, if the roster stays where it is right now or doesn't really grow in that area, I think that's where we're going to be again next year.
Just quick question for you, Aaron. Do you not feel like Caris Levert can provide some of that secondary playmaking off the bench?
He's going to have to. I mean, looking at the roster, he is the backup point guard in my mind. At least I would rather him be the backup point guard over Marcus Sasser, who we saw last year is just not, at least yet, an NBA level point guard, whether he's a starter or a bench player. So he now has to take over that role. And I think if that was what they were looking for, I think Malik Monk's just a better playmaker. He's more comfortable with the ball in his hands. And I like his scoring ability more than Caris Levert. Again, I think the shooting is pretty close. And I like what Monk can do with the ball in his hands, attacking the rim. I like his athleticism. And again, I think he's a better playmaker. I get he's making more money. He's making about $5 to $6 million more dollars a year than Caris Levert is. And that's absolutely a factor. But if you're telling me I have to pick between those two guys, I would have picked Malik Monk. Moving into the Duncan Robinson signing, this was a signing that at first I was worried about. It originally came out 3 years, $48 million. So I was like, whoa, $16 million a year. The end of that contract, Duncan Robinson's going to be 35 years old. I know this wasn't Trajan Langdon's roster when, or wasn't his franchise when he was when Bojan Bogdanovic was here, but didn't we just see how this kind of plays out? These guys get older and you're paying them that much money. It's you don't know if you're going to get that kind of production as they continue to get older. But then it comes out that the second year is guaranteed for $10 million. The third year is not guaranteed at all. So this really is a 2-year deal. I mean, unless Duncan Robinson just completely falls off the face of the earth as a shooter this year, it's hard to see him playing bad enough to the point where the Pistons need to waive his $10 million next season. So for me, I'm looking at it as a 2-year deal with Detroit. It's a contract that can get moved. That third year being non-guaranteed makes it obviously a much easier contract to move as well. You've talked about that with Levert. I think Duncan Robinson falls right in that same bucket as contracts that Detroit can use to get salary done in trades that they might want to make. But look, they had to figure out something to improve this team's shooting with Tim Hardaway Jr. departing for Denver and the Malik Beasley situation. So this was, a good move in that regard. If you're living under a rock and you didn't hear about this, Detroit also sent Simone Fontecchio out to Miami in this deal. It was a sign and trade with Miami. So salute to the Italian stallion. Going to miss him. I will not forget his 15-game stretch with Detroit in the 2022-2023 season. It was spectacular basketball. But no, I think the Duncan Robinson signing is a good signing. I was worried at night one of free agency as all these shooters started getting plucked off the market, and we saw all these targets of Detroit that they were reportedly interested in getting plucked off the market. I mean, Atlanta took 2 of them in Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Luke Kennard, but Detroit's able to get something there in that department shooting-wise in Duncan Robinson, and I think he's going to play a pretty big role on this team, all things considered, when you look at the current depth chart.
One thing I'll say in regards to Malik Monk versus Caris Levert. In a vacuum, I'm taking Malik Monk all day. There is no question in my mind. Like, who's the better player? You got to pick one. I'm taking Malik Monk, right? I feel like you'd say the exact same thing. But I don't think you can ignore the situation in regards to, like, while I agree, yes, they need backup playmaking, I do think Caris Levert gives them more of that than anybody else they had on the roster last year, like before they acquired Schroder, right? Would you agree with that?
Yep.
So I think for me, I still see the plan being like, you're splitting those you're still staggering those Cade Ivey minutes. And if you bring in a Malik Monk, I think you kind of mess with the staggering there. Malik Monk's going to look at that and he's go, I should be the primary playmaker on these backup units. And I think if you have that and Jaden Ivey, they have very overlapping skill sets. Except Jaden Ivey is honestly a better off-ball shooter. I think when and they also have like very similar defensive limitations. I'm not saying Caris Levert is some knockout defender, but he does give you a level of positional versatility defensively. More than Malik Monk would give you, more than Tim Hardaway Jr. gave you last year, certainly more than Malik Beasley gave you. And I think also what he does is like he can play off ball while still having some level of playmaking ability. And yeah, if they lose Ivy or Cade, of course they're in trouble. But let's be honest, if they lose one of Ivy or Cade for an extended period of time, again, they're in trouble already. Like the whole thing is screwed just off of that. So like, it doesn't really make a difference for me. I think when I look at it, I'd rather have the versatility defensively. I'd rather have a guy that allows Jaden Ivey to truly take control of those, like when Cade is out playmaking duties, while also helping him out a little bit. Because remember, Ivey didn't have any help last year when Cade was off the floor. And like he was definitely overmatched. I think this puts him in a little better of a position. And third, that extra year, I know you said it's just like $5 million. I really, really think that like the length and terms of these contracts made them so tradable. I think you've maintained a level of flexibility that, frankly, when the Beasley news hit, I was not sure you were going to be able to find. I thought it was going to be one of those things where it's like, oh, you're going to have to overpay for somebody.
Adding some breaking news as we're recording to this.
Oh,
according to Amari Sankofa of the Detroit Free Press, talking about that flexibility, the Dennis Schroder signing will end up being a sign and trade between the Pistons and Kings.
Trey Lyles,
Omari, the Pistons are able to take back up to $22.6 million from a trade, or will generate a player exception worth $14.3 million if they don't take a player back in the deal. So some more additional flexibility for Detroit now. And so, it always made sense for this to be a sign and trade with Sacramento in the Dennis Schroder signing.
Well, especially since they're apparently going after Russell Westbrook as well. Thank God we're not Kings fans, man. Holy crap. That's crazy. Okay. So, I mean, I think this was the next thing we were going to talk about, which is like, where have the Pistons not done what they need to do? And I think that's very clear. We could talk about the positional flexibility with Duncan Robinson. Yes, Duncan Robinson has played power forward minutes before. No, I do not want him playing power forward minutes for me. Especially with the Pistons front court being how it is. I do not want that. But they still have, and especially with the departure of Simone Fontecchio, a real hole at those backup 4 minutes. And this is something I was actually going to bring up.
Yeah.
And now that it turns out it will be a sign and trade, I think, honestly, a Trey Lyles reunion might not be the worst thing in the world.
I'm going to need you to think a little bit bigger than that.
Okay, fine. LeBron's getting bought out, and I'm thinking big, baby.
No, I've seen a lot of talk, and this is just talk. This is nothing source, but I've seen a lot of talk about John Collins. That would excite me more than Trey Lyles. I like
that contract
finishing at the rim. I like he can shoot it a little bit.
That's a lot of money, dude. He's making $24 million a year, dude. We have this conversation like once every 6 months where you go, but what about John Collins? Wait, how much is he making again? I think it's like $24 million.
$25 million a year. But it's an expiring contract.
After this year or next year?
It's an expiring contract. He's unrestricted.
I thought it was after next year because, okay, if you say so.
He's under contract with a player option that he accepted for the 2025-26 season.
Okay. Oh yeah, obviously accepted that.
We're into John Collins now.
I think.
I mean, if they have the cap space to do it,
I don't think they're going to have the cap space. That's the problem. Not unless. Well, wait. How much is the TPE they create there?
They can take back up to $22 million in the trade. So
so you couldn't make it work. I don't think you can make it work even if you
include a contract.
Who are you going to include?
I don't know, but you only have to go up with $4 or $5 million.
Paul Reed, thank you for your service. I don't know. Honestly, I think I'd rather have Trey Lyles. I'm just talking. This is my backup power forward who's playing 18 minutes a night for me. I think. Dude, I can't believe I'm saying. Please talk me out of this, Aaron. I'm like literally just like being like, yeah, I don't want Trey Lyles. What am I talking about?
You're not going to get me there, unfortunately.
I'm trying not to get myself here. Like, save me from myself.
There's no pathway.
No, but like, look, honestly, Trey Lyles has been a solid 3-point shooter. He is not a great defender by any means, but he is a better defender than John Collins. That ain't saying much, but it is saying something. And the thing there, too, is like you're going to get him for way less money.
PJ Washington?
I don't think the Mavs are going to give him up. I think he's a Mav. Like, I don't know. I'm not looking for anything crazy here. I'm just looking for a guy who can give me 15, 18 minutes a night and hit a 3-ball. Like, that's it. Trey Lyles is that.
Dallas has got to be pushing some sort of apron. I mean, they're with the contracts that they have. They're bringing in D'Angelo Russell. They signed Kyrie to the big extension. They've got to be pushing.
Yeah, but that's another one. You wouldn't. I mean, you'd have to get that as like a 3-team trade between them and the Kings. I don't see how you can really do that. I think we need to unfortunately like. Aim low for that backup power forward. You just need somebody who could be 10% better than Simone Fontecchio was last year.
And this is my like overarching issue with the Pistons free agency so far. Not that things can't change, but as of where we stand right now, I think at best the moves that Detroit has made thus far has been linear. I don't think they've gotten better. And I think you could make a case that they've gotten slightly worse.
So, I disagree. I see it the opposite way. I think it's either the same or they've gotten slightly better. And I say that just because, like, I think Caris Levert and Duncan Robinson are better defenders. And I don't think you can ignore, like, how big of a black hole Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. were at times defensively for this team last year. I'm not saying either of these guys is great, but like
I've never seen anything on them that says these guys are more than maybe adequate defenders. And I don't think Dennis Schroder was a below average defender or is a worse defender than Caris Levert. Maybe Malik Beasley is, but I look at the production that they got from Malik Beasley. I look at the production they got from Dennis Schroder. I look at the fact that Beasley's a little bit younger as well. The money was going to be slightly cheaper for Beasley. I don't know. I cannot say that they got better. I can say they are at best where they were. And going back to my main point here is that's disappointing when you just made the playoffs. You could have made, if a couple plays go your way and you're a little bit healthier, you could have gone a little bit deeper in the playoffs. And then an East that's wide open, I think maybe you don't have to push all your chips in and go try to get Jaylen Brown or whatever, but I would have liked to have seen Detroit take a bigger step forward. I would have liked to have seen them commit a little bit more to improving the roster. Again, Trajan Langdon can absolutely have his plan. He can absolutely do his thing, but these moves, they just don't, they don't move me in a way where I feel like Detroit's taking a step next year because they got better in the offseason. It's going to be on what apparently the front office is telling us, that internal development. There has to be a significant belief in Jaden Ivey. There has to be significant belief in Jalen Duren that both those guys are taking another step forward. There has to be significant belief that Asar Thompson is going to become more than just an absolute defensive menace. He's going to take steps offensively, maybe not as a shooter, but as a creator, as a finisher. I just would have liked to have seen them surround this core with better role players that would maximize these guys and would better protect some of their weaknesses. I still think they're very thin in the shooting department. They were already a mediocre three-point shooting team last year, and they just lost Malik Beasley, who was one of the best three-point shooters in the league, and Tim Hardaway Jr., who made 168 threes from last year. They were short on shooting last year, and they're shorter on shooting now.
Yeah, but, and I think this is going to be, we're going to say this a lot because I think there's a counter argument to every argument here. Yes, but like Malik Beasley had the best three-point shooting year of his career last year with Detroit. Do you think it's because Malik Beasley took a step forward, or do you think it's because Cade Cunningham is just that good? And like, I don't see why Duncan Robinson cannot replicate 95% of Malik Beasley's production last year. I mean, for God's sakes, he's hit almost 300 threes in a season multiple times in his career, and he has not ever had a playmaker as good as Cade Cunningham on his roster. I think when you look at it, like, yes, like, did they perhaps get a little worse when you look at the guys that left versus the guys that came in? I don't know, maybe. But I don't see this as like they trust Jaden Ivey, they trust Jalen Duren. I see it as the opposite. I think they still don't feel like they know what they have in Jaden Ivey. I feel like they still are not sold on Jalen Duren, defensively in particular. And lastly, I think Asar Thompson is really the key to all this working. Not to quote George Lucas, like, Jar Jar is the key to all this. Asar is the key to all this, because if he can take a jump similar to what his brother did last year, especially in the playmaking department, none of this, it doesn't matter. Like, all this stuff we're talking about playmaking, yeah, they're a little thin here, a little thin there. They're going to be just fine if Asar Thompson can take a little bit of that leap. And if you can combine that and Caris Levert, hey, who knows? Maybe Chaz Lanier comes in and actually is able to provide you something off of the bench. Hopefully the percentages from outside for Jaden Ivey were not a mirage, but he can just up his volume. If he's taking 6.5 threes a game, I think you can, in the aggregate, replace the production you've lost here, while again maintaining roster flexibility, financial flexibility, and giving your young guys a real opportunity to prove that they are deserving of a financial commitment. Because again, it hasn't happened yet. And I really do think, like, if it was going to happen this offseason, I think we would have heard something. I think we would have heard something like Detroit is not focusing on extensions for Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren until they've sewn up their free agency class. We haven't heard anything about it. That does not make me think that those moves are coming down the pike anytime soon.
But have we heard anything about any rookie extensions for anybody in that class yet? Chet hasn't signed anything. Keegan Murray hasn't signed anything. Benedict Mathurin hasn't signed anything. I haven't heard anything. I mean, I guess I'm not as plugged into, those teams and, their inner workings as much, but even just on the national level, I haven't heard anything on that. I haven't heard anything for anybody in that class. So, I mean, to me, and I don't want to spend the whole podcast going back and forth, but if the Pistons don't trust Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren, and they didn't want to push any chips in this year because they didn't trust those guys, then they needed to move on from those guys this offseason, because you have a borderline top 10 player in the league in Cade Cunningham. And if you don't believe those guys are good enough to be a part of your competing team, you cannot waste this player's career. He is a already borderline top 10 player at 23 years old. So if for whatever reason you don't believe in either of them, one of them, both of them, then in my opinion, you've got to start finding a way to move on from them.
I agree, but that's divorced from free agency. Like who they were not going to get a number 2 in free agency. That just look at who was out there. There was nobody. NAW, like really, if they signed Nikhil Alexander-Walker instead of Caris Levert, are we really coming on here and being like, slam dunk, book that trip to the finals right now? No, like they were going to get role players in free agency. It's going to be trades. If they're going to make that big step, I've literally been saying this since Donovan Mitchell got traded. This is the path the Pistons are going to have to take. They're going to have a roster that works with the guys they have. It's the trade deadline. It's all about the trade deadline this year. Like, I know people want to, like, after coming off of that 6-game loss, you're a little disappointed, but you're really excited, and free agency hit, and you want to just go, oh my God, we're going for it all. We're winning the championship. That's just not how the NBA works anymore. It just doesn't. Like, stars don't hit free agency. And if they do, that's not a good sign, because it means you're probably going to have to ridiculously overpay for them and gut your roster. So, like, for me, I'm totally fine with where they're at, as long as they're maintaining the flexibility, as long as they're giving the young guys still a chance, but also being like, hey, you're going to have to progress if we're going to commit to you. The way I see it is like they've done what they needed to do in free agency, and you cannot ignore the Beasley situation. It screwed them before anything started. It was like, I'm having like flashbacks to Troy Weaver trading for Joe Harris, like before free agency starts. It's like, can we ever just get one normal offseason, please?
Last thing I'll say here is if this offseason is linear for Detroit and they kind of just maintain, they don't make any more big moves, maybe they add their backup 4. The problem with staying linear for them is that Orlando is shaping up to be much better. Atlanta is shaping up to be much better. I think teams like Toronto are going to be better. I think teams like Washington, with the mix of veterans that they have now, are going to be a little bit better. And I could see the Pistons kind of just falling in line with them. And if the East is just a little bit more competitive in that mid-area range, instead of being a 6 seed or taking a step forward, which I think should be the desire, you should, be trying to take that next step. I think they could end up sliding back and being that 7, 8, 9 seed. And then you're going into a first round matchup against a 1 or 2 seed where you're probably not getting out of the first round again.
But where were they doing that this offseason? Like, just in the time period we're talking about? Because I'm in agreement with you. Like, they're going to have to make a trade at some point. I think anybody who argues otherwise is just not looking at the league. Like, you're just not really paying attention, unfortunately. Like, we both agree on this, but like, where was the opportunity? Where was the opportunity? There was never any talk of like, oh, Trey Murphy is actively being shopped right now. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But like, if he is, maybe they did make a call. Maybe they did go, hey, New Orleans, what'll it take for this? Oh, you want 4 first rounders? You want 3 first rounders and Jaden Ivey and Isaiah Stewart? I don't really know about that. Like, I just think that, like, with the situation as it is, the way I look at it, they've done as well as they could have. And we're saying this before we see what the return might be on this possible sign and trade. Sacramento apparently still wants to move on from Malik Monk. We're talking about them not getting Malik Monk. They still could get Malik Monk. It doesn't fix their backup power forward situation, but like, hey, in the words of Hannah Montana, that's the best of both worlds. So I don't know, man. Like, I'm really not feeling let down by this. I'm disappointed for sure because of the Beasley thing. I wanted him back. But when you look at what was available, what was the other move here? Like, what was the other move? I don't see it.
To get involved in the trade market is for sure a thing.
It's like what they're doing now. They're doing a sign and trade. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, this still goes back to what we talked about at the start of the show. Like, I'm sitting here saying they're going to need more guard production. Now, that could change with this Malik Monk deal, but then it's like you have Malik Monk, you have Caris Levert, you have Jaden Ivey, you have Duncan Robinson. How are you playing all those guys?
I mean, I still think like there's a path to 2 guard minutes for Ron Holland. I think there's a path to 2 guard minutes for Chaz Lanier.
And Asar Thompson.
And Asar Thompson. Like, honestly, there's minutes at the 4 for Asar Thompson too. Like, I just think that there
are not minutes at the 4 for Ron Holland, Pistons Twitter. The guy is 200 pounds.
Who
I've got
said
people
this?
in my mentions telling me Ron Holland's ready to take the power forward spot.
Oh, come on, man.
So
yeah, 6'5", 210-pound power forward. Yep.
Look,
Okay.
I don't think you and I don't think I are going to convince each other to switch opinions here. I think you're a little bit more satisfied with the offseason than I am so far. There's still a lot of time left. Like, there's no sweeping judgments to make yet, considering free agency started 49 hours ago from when we're recording. So there's so much that can change, and this could absolutely turn into some home run offseason because the Pistons were behind closed doors, not leaking anything, making some major moves. But for me, I am in a wait and see, and I think I need some more to be done for me to feel better about the construction of this roster. And looking at that theoretical depth chart, I just see some holes that they need to fix.
I definitely agree with you there, Aaron. We saw them coming into this offseason. Look, they've only, in my opinion, replaced production. They haven't upped the production, and they had holes in their roster going into this offseason, even if they brought back those guys. We're in total agreement on that. Yeah. I guess for me, it's more of like I'm looking at it. I think they have done the best job they could have done given the circumstances. I'm not mad at it. And I think that's the big sentiment I've been seeing in my discussions with people online, offline, is people are going, what are the Pistons doing? And I'm just saying, like, this is a time for patience and caution. And that's okay. I want them to come out tomorrow and say, we are making a trade for a huge star. I want that. We are in the same boat on this. But I also have to understand that there are bigger things going on with this roster. There are a lot of questions they need to answer, and that just didn't get answered because of injuries last year. Like, that is the reality of what happened. You have to play the cards you're dealt. A good poker player does not go all in every hand. Sometimes you have a decent hand and you fold. Sometimes you have a decent hand, you go in and you win. Sometimes you have a great hand and you go all in and you lose to the only possible cards better than you. That's like how it is in the NBA. You have to roll with the punches. And I think when you look at the cards they were dealt, they haven't screwed it up. And that to me is the key, because Troy Weaver screwed it up time and time again. Stan Van Gundy screwed it up time and time again. Joe Dumars screwed it up time and time again. When I'm looking at this, there's nothing that's happened so far in this offseason that is a long-term detriment to this roster or to any players on it. And to me, that is good enough for right now. Talk to me in 6 months of the trade deadline, I might have a different answer for you. If they don't get a power forward before the season starts, I might have a different answer for you. But for now, I'm just okay with it.
Well, I think the big storyline here as we wrap up the show is waiting and seeing what happens with this financial flexibility that the Pistons gain as part of the Dennis Schroder signing, turning into a sign and trade between the Pistons and Kings. We'll certainly see what happens there. Selfishly, I hope it doesn't happen until maybe tomorrow at this time of the night, so that people can listen to this podcast and hear us talk about these things before the Pistons add some impactful player that might completely change either of our opinions on this show. But before anything else can happen, we're going to wrap this up so we can get this show out to all of you here that are listening. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. It has been a very, very fast-paced offseason already. It's only going to continue as we continue to dive deeper into free agency. And the Summer League is starting next week as well. So a lot to get into still this offseason. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe, for myself, Aaron Johnson, and my co-host, Jasper Apollonia. Thanks so much for watching and listening. We'll see you guys next time.